of the things that is important for us to understand about Active Directory is that in a lot of our organizations and businesses, we have more than one location, right? You aren't always a business that's just located in one building in one place. You might be spread out through multiple geographical locations. And you want to have an understanding of how replication works when you are spread out throughout multiple geographic locations. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to just talk about first off, what is a site? So a site is an object in Active Directory that is going to represent usually a physical geographical location. Okay, so a site, an object that represents a physical geographical location. All right, and it's going to be used to help control replication amongst your DCs. Okay, so it's an object that it's usually going to represent a physical geographical location. It's used to help control replication amongst your DCs. Now, Active Directory doesn't use GPS or anything like that to determine where your domain controllers are. So it's up to us to tell Active Directory. Now, in the beginning, Active Directory just thinks you just have one place, one location where everything is stored. Okay, everything being stored in that one location. They call it the default first site name. Okay, and then from there, all domain controllers get put in that object, which means, according to Active Directory believes that everything is just stored in the same place. Okay, so we have to basically go into Active Directory and configure Active Directory so that it knows how things are laid out. So in my little imaginary example here, we're going to say that we have 3 locations. One is in New York City, one is in Dallas, Texas, and then one is in Birmingham, Alabama. All right. Ovals are usually the symbol that represent a site when you're drawing this out. So that's why I've used ovals. And then these lines are going to represent the connection between the sites. These can be kind of like you want to be thinking about WAN lines. Maybe you have a wide area network connection or something that connects your offices together. That's what that's going to represent. These little lines are going to represent, they're known as something called a site link, which I'll talk more about coming up. Okay. First, let's just look at how replication occurs from within a site. Okay. All right. So let's say that we have, let me just create a domain controller here, DC. Okay, because really it's only domain controllers that matter when it comes to all this. All right, so here is a DC. All right, and we're going to say that we have in New York, we're going to pretend like we have 4 domain controllers. All right, now within Active Directory on a domain controller has this component called the KCC. The KCC is the knowledge consistency checker, and all domain controllers have that component. All right, so the KCC on your different domain controllers are going to communicate with each other, and they're going to locate each other. They're actually going to do almost like a ping to determine how close each domain controller is in the same site. And they will create a circular replication ring amongst these DCs by determining how close they are, the latency between the different DCs. Okay, and so what then happens once these this internal replication ring is created by the way, this is called Intrasite. Okay, replication. Intrasite replication is the replication ring that's going to happen within the site. Okay, and essentially what's going to happen there is your domain controllers will replicate very quickly within just a few seconds of something changing, okay? Usually within about 30 seconds. So, for example, if I create a user account, okay, let's say that this little smiley face here, I'm going to create a little smiley face object. This little smiley face is going to represent a user account, all right? And so basically what will happen is if you created this little user account, let's say you created it on this first DC right here, within about 30 seconds, this DC will contact its neighbor and say, hey neighbor, I've got a change for you. Do you need this change? And the domain controller will say, yeah, I don't have that change. So at that point, the user will get replicated over to that other DC. And then within 30 seconds, it's going to contact the next DC, and he's going to pull that change as well. And then that DC is going to tell the next DC, and he's going to pull the change until they all know about that change. So that is how replication is going to happen within a site. Okay, I'm going to move my little user account out of the way for just a moment. We'll come back to him. All right. So that is called intrasite replication. The other thing that happens with the KCC is the KCC is about every 15 minutes it's going to check to see if all of the DCs are still communicating. So the KCCs are always communicating with each other. If one of the DCs goes down for any reason, like let's say this goes down, then it updates the ring to look like this. It would just use these three until he comes back online. So it does provide some redundancy. The KCC is constantly checking to make sure that there is some redundancy there. Okay, so that is how replication occurs within a site. It occurs very, very quickly. So you can imagine the issue of what happens when you've got domain controllers that are spread out over longer geographical locations. Okay, so for example, let me create another DC here. We're going to put some in Dallas here. We'll put 3 DCs in Dallas. Okay, and then maybe some DCs over in Birmingham. All right. Originally, Birmingham maybe was a small office, but it's grown into a bigger office, so it's getting full-blown DCs with lots of users there. Okay, so the same thing's going to happen here. The problem, though, in the beginning is that all DCs are going to start out on the same site. Okay, so if the very first site in Active Directory is called the default first site, all domain controllers are going to be in that site. So you have to go in Active Directory, you have to create the different sites, which I'm going to show you, and then you have to move the domain controllers into the proper site, which I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Okay, if you don't, then all 10 of these DCs would be in the first site, and they would all replicate. Every time there's a change, that would happen within that 30-second interval. When there's a change, 30 seconds, and then it goes across to every DC. Now, if you have good bandwidth, okay, like, you've got plenty of bandwidth between your offices, it may not be a big deal to have a single site, okay? But if you got slow connections between your offices, okay, like let's say that this connection here is, we'll say, just like we'll say 5 Mbps connection, all right, and maybe this is a 2 Mbps connection, all right, then you may not want them replicating very, very quickly. You would want to separate the sites. You would want to have multiple sites and not put everything all in one site, because you don't want replication to happen so fast amongst those different sites. So what happens when you separate your domain controllers into different sites? Okay, well, when you do that, the KCCs on those machines build the ring, just like they did in New York. It'll happen automatically. You don't have to do anything to make this happen. And then what happens by default is the KCC will appoint a server known as a bridgehead server. So in each site, one of the servers will be known as a bridgehead. The bridgehead is the server that does replication between the sites. And the replication occurs every 180 minutes between the bridgeheads. Okay, that's called Intersite replication. Intersite replication. Okay, and this is going to occur every 180 minutes, or in other words, 3 hours. Okay, now by default, there is a feature known as site link bridging that is enabled. Site link bridging means that when the 3-hour time interval hits, all bridgehead servers talk to each other across the entire company. So what will end up happening is, for example, I create this user right here on this DC, okay, it's going to replicate very quickly amongst the other DCs in that office. Now, when the 3-hour time interval hits, this bridgehead is going to contact both of these bridgeheads. So this guy right here is going to learn about it, and this guy right here is going to learn about it. They're going to learn about it at the exact same time. And then at that point, they're going to replicate it around to their domain controllers, and this user account will now exist in these on all the DCs across the board. Okay, and so that's how that's going to work. Okay, now the other thing that I want to help you understand, and I'm going to get rid of the user account again. I'm going to move him out of the way just to kind of clean things up a little bit. Is I want to talk about some redundancy for your sites in case a link goes down. So these right here, these are called site links. They're going to represent the connections between the sites. Now you might have, let's say that for redundancy, your company has a WAN connection between Dallas and Birmingham. It's a WAN line, a wide area network connection, and let's just say it's a very slow connection, just as a backup. Okay, let's say it's 512K, okay, kilobits per second. Very slow connection. And it's only to be used if one of these other lines goes down. So it's actually faster, if you think about it, if replication is occurring between offices, it's actually faster for this bridgehead to contact this bridgehead through New York than it is to contact directly. But here's what you got to understand. Site links, there's two requirements for a site link. First off, you have to have a name for a site link. Secondly, you have to have something called cost. Okay, so let's illustrate this. So I'm going to give my site link between New York and Dallas. I'm going to call it. We'll call it Dallas dash, and I like to do this. I like to say 5MB dash New York. Okay, and that's just how I like to name it. Okay, and then we'll call this one. We're going to call it New York dash 2MB. Oops, that just represents the speed. It's just a name anyway, and then I'll just put Birm for Birmingham. Okay, can't have any spaces when you name it. And then this connection here, we'll call it Birm dash 512K dash Dallas, and that's just going to represent the object that is known as a site link. Okay, so again, a site link. This is going to represent the connection between your sites. Now, this connection has this number called cost, okay? And the default cost is always 100. That's just the number they chose. So every one of these has this number that is set to 100. Now, you're going to change the cost to whatever you want in order to make replication occur the way you want it to occur. Right now, it would cost for this domain controller right here to communicate with this domain controller right here, this bridgehead. It would cost 200 to go through New York. It would only cost 100 to talk directly over the 512K. So what you want to do is you don't want that to happen. You only want this connection to be used if one of these connections is not available. So you're going to change the cost, okay? So I'm going to, and the rule of thumb generally with cost is you can make the number whatever you want, but you want the faster connection to have a lower cost number. So we're going to set the first one here, the 5 megabit per second. We're going to change that to 25, okay? Now, I can change to what I want. This is just one way to do it, okay? We're going to set the 2 megabyte to, well, we'll just leave it to 100. And then we'll set the 512, we're going to set that to 400, okay? And so now if you add all that up, and you could have done this so many different ways, it really doesn't matter. Once you add all that up, it would cost 125 to replicate this way. It would cost 400 to replicate that way, okay? All right. And so that is how your site links work. Now, the other thing that's critical for replication is that each site, you must associate all the TCP/IP subnets with that site. Okay, so for example, if New York, let's say that New York's subnet is 192.168.1.0/24, you would need to illustrate that. And then maybe Dallas is 192.168.2.0/24, and then Birmingham is 192.168.3.0/24. So the reason that's important is because DNS, your domain name system, is going to receive this information, and it's going to know which domain controllers reside in which site. So it's very important if we have a computer that is logging on in Dallas, we're going to want that computer to interact with the domain controller in Dallas. If the computer is logging on in New York, we want it to interact with the domain controller in New York. If it's logging on in Birmingham, we want it to interact with the domain controllers in Birmingham. Those subnet objects are going to play a role in making that happen. Okay? All right. The last thing I want to mention is site link bridging. Now, site link bridging is something that's enabled by default in your Active Directory site environment, and it just means all bridgehead servers can communicate with all other bridgehead servers. And that's generally the way you want it to happen. But I will say, in a very slow environment, you may not want that to happen every 3 hours. You may want to alter replication. Let me give you an example. Okay, let's go down here. All right, so here you got your first site, you got another site, and these sites are connected together. All right. Now let's say for a moment that you have, let's say that you have a site in, let's say the Caribbean. Okay. So Caribbean. All right. So you've got a site located in the Caribbean being, the islands. There's different islands in the Caribbean, and I just realized that I typoed that. Oops, let me fix that. All right, there we go. Caribbean. So the Caribbean is made up of a bunch of different islands, right? And so you got your main island here. We'll say, actually, you know what? We'll do this. We'll say this is like Miami. All right, so we have Miami, and then you have some Caribbean islands here. All right, that you've got offices at. Okay, now you've got very slow satellite connections that connect these offices together from Miami in Florida. Okay, and so site link bridging is turned on, which basically means that right now, if you have a domain controller in every one of those locations, right now, every 3 hours, they're all going to replicate. The problem is that these connections are very slow. And so instead, maybe you're going to allow these sites to replicate because they have solid connections. You're going to allow them to replicate immediately when the 3-hour time interval hits. But you can disable bridging for all the sites, and you can make it where these sites are bridged so that every 3 hours they replicate bridgehead servers all together. And then what you'll do with these is you'll separate these out so they have their own 3-hour time interval. So basically, this has its own 3-hour time interval. It's going to replicate with this. This guy will never replicate directly with this site or that site if you do that. If you disable site link bridging, they can only replicate with their parent site. They won't replicate with all these others. So that also, though, does mean that when something changes over here, Miami has to learn about it, and then at that point, Miami, when the next 3-hour time interval hits, it'll replicate it here. So that's the idea of site link bridging, okay? So site link bridging is turned on for all sites by default, and then if you want to alter that, you can, okay? All right. So now, hopefully, you got a visualization of how sites work, site links, this concept of intersite replication versus intrasite replication. Intrasite replication is going to occur very quickly by separating your domain controllers into different sites. You can break that up and change it to every 3 hours. By the way, all of that is alterable. You can alter the 3-hour time interval however you want. And then the subnet objects, again, they're going to represent the TCP/IP subnets with each site. This is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want you to know that I'm trying really hard to grow this channel, so I hope you'll give me a like and a subscribe. Also, if you'll check the description in this video, I've got a link for you that can show you how you can get access to all my different courses. I have lots of different Microsoft certification courses that'll help you pass your exam. All right, thanks a lot for watching the video, and I hope to see you again.